All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this afternoon's webinar. My name is Daniela Labate, and I'm from NIAPRS, and we are a MCTAC partner. Today's webinar is the first of two in a series that we've planned for you to follow up from our in-person supervision trainings that took place around New York State back in August. And today's webinar will focus on adopting the principles of trauma-informed care. So welcome, everyone. And for some reason, oh, there we go. I was going to say my slides are not advancing, but now they are. All right, so before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping slides to go through. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the slides can be found on the MCTAC website in about a day or two. We have set aside some time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers, and we really do encourage you to use the chat box feature to type in your questions throughout the presentation. Please type them in to all panelists so that we can keep track of them during the webinar and then answer your questions. And any questions that we don't have a chance to get to today, we will certainly try to address and email you back those answers. All right, I'm still having a little trouble here. Tara, can you do me a Oh, okay. I was going to ask you to advance the slides because they weren't advancing. All right. So this is our MCTAC Plus partner slide. And as you can see, MCTAC Plus is a partnership with the Managed Care Technical Assistance Center at NYU McSilver, along with ASAP, the Coalition, and Families Together. And for those of you that are new to MCTAC Plus offerings, we're a part of the larger Managed Care Technical Assistance Center, and we focus training and technical assistance in smaller group settings, which allows for a more tailored discussion, and these services are available to all children's and adult behavioral health providers throughout New York State. So before I introduce today's presenter, I just want to remind you to register for next month's webinar. This will be the final offering in the Supervision series, and its focus will be on engaging in difficult conversations with employees, and that webinar will take place on Tuesday, October 15th from noon to 1 p.m. So please go to the MCTAC website and register for that. And now I'm going to turn the controls over to Eve Addis. So he's going to be guiding you through today's webinar. Eve has an extensive history of working in behavioral health settings. He's currently working with a number of organizations and helping them to transform their culture into a more trauma-informed one. And he's worked in the behavioral health field for many years now in New York City and is a consultant that I've personally had the pleasure of working with for a few years now. So I just want to welcome Eve. And Eve, I believe that you should now have the presenter ball, so you can go ahead and advance the slides.
Okay, I'm waiting for the presenter ball. Okay, I've got it. Great. Okay, welcome everybody. So today is a presentation is kind of dense in that we're trying to put together a couple of very, very deep-seated ideas, supervision and trauma-informed culture. So we're going to start with identifying issues and challenges as a way of kind of orienting us to the rest of the discussion. So first, let's start with what draws people to work in behavioral health. And that is a mixed bag, and this list is certainly not exhaustive, but, you know, people find the work stimulating personally and professionally. The work is morally appealing to some in terms of helping others, social justice. Very often people say, I want to make a difference. There's also a challenge and satisfaction of helping others and one's own personal growth. And then there's that, you know, rare adventure appeal of working in extreme and challenging circumstances. So I'm sure you can add more to this list, but these are the ones that we typically see. So let's now turn to supervisors and why do people become supervisors? And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but, you know, there's a natural career progression sort of element in it. There's a desire for increased pay and benefits, which comes with the supervisory role. Expectations often from agency leadership to keep moving up. Tenure, sometimes years on the job, just sort of puts you there. The desire for increased autonomy and authority, and status. And so we have now an idea of what draws people to the field in general and what sort of motivates people to become supervisors. So what does it mean to be a supervisor in human services? So this circle really covers the inspirational role of supervisors. As a teacher, a supervisor serves well to teach supervisees, providing support on the job, modeling, practices and behaviors that supervisees should be taking on, serving as an advocate, collaboration, which we'll get later on into much more later on, certainly evaluation and challenge. And so what we have here is a real sort of well-rounded, if you will, set of elements that involve or that supervisors have. And as we move on, I kind of put this together because this is sort of the basics of supervision. Whenever anybody takes on a supervisory role, this is kind of the 101. I'm going to provide guidance and support. I'm going to rely on my experience and share expertise, help people problem solve, train people in policy implementation. I'm, of course, going to sample documentation, timeliness, and quality. I'm going to monitor productivity, time and attendance. I'm going to monitor adherence to job responsibilities and do a lot of task management. There'll also be the unfortunate disciplinary activity when things go south, and, of course, responsible for terminating people who are not doing the job. Now, I would add to this list, if you were there, and I would ask you to help me add to this list, two things we might add to this list are doing performance evaluations and also recommending people for promotions. Now, supervision obviously is a lot more than this, but this is sort of the basics. Now, when we think about supervision, why does an organization, how does an organization benefit from supervision, or what's the organizational objective of supervision in behavioral health? So these are the responsibilities we typically find in supervisor job descriptions. Develop staff competencies, maintain a standard of care, ensure proper and consistent implementation of policies, procedures, and practices, provide regulatory oversight, and promote organizational culture. These are the typical ones. Now, you may add others, but these are the ones that I find are most typically there in those job descriptions. Now, given those, let's look at what the barriers are for managing and retaining a talented and effective workforce. Supervisors manage workforce, and they also are very often at that place where retention of a workforce lies. So the barriers here that supervisors have to deal with are that salaries very often are not competitive. Talent is hard to find at the current salaries. There are competing healthcare environments, meaning other settings that require the same skill sets but that pay more money. The work is demanding. There's no question about that. The work has inherent risks for the individuals. And then there's a list here of occupational hazards. And those are the ones that everyone, I'm sure, on this call knows about. And these are the continuous exposure to the pain and suffering of others. In working in this field, this is a day-to-day experience. The potential of a triggering of the worker's own pain and suffering. Our workforce are human beings, and they come to their jobs with experiences of their own. And these experiences can be triggered in the workspace. The personalization and blurring of boundaries. This is something that very often impacts people in the behavioral health workforce, compassion fatigue, and burnout. Now, I want to say that the occupational hazards here over time, in particular, the continuous exposure to pain and suffering of others, over time, this can lead to compassion fatigue. And that is, for anyone who doesn't know, a workforce phenomenon that can undermine productivity and the overall effectiveness of service delivery. So this can have a tremendous impact on how we work with consumers and whether or not we achieve our objective of maximizing and optimizing the health of our consumers. Now, we're going to get into that later on in much more depth later into the presentation, but I wanted to just say that this issue of compassion fatigue is central to the theme of this presentation, which is the application of trauma-informed principles. So, moving on, we must ask ourselves, in general, how do we prepare people to become supervisors? How do we know that our workforce is ready to move from direct service into a supervisory role? How, as organizations, do we endeavor to meet the expectations of the people we employ for work in our behavioral health setting? You know, this is an important feature that I can't overemphasize. People come to jobs with expectations, and do we pay attention to those, and do we take the time to address them in the day-to-day supervisory roles that we have? How do we keep our workforce interested, motivated, and fulfilled in their work? This is important to keep people working at maximum, to keep people working and producing effective results. And how do we do that? How do we prevent compassion fatigue? Compassion fatigue has a lot of implications, loss of productivity, negligence risk, and then, of course, there is that piece that we have to address, given that we are all working with limited resources. When we lose staff, there are costs associated with recruitment and onboarding. And if we don't pay attention to staff retention and doing the kinds of things that holds on to the staff that we value, there's a relentless cost associated with recruitment and onboarding, and it's not cheap. Retraining staff, there's a lot lost when staff turn over. And I think that as we move on with this presentation, to keep in mind that retention and whatever we do to promote retention has at least a cost associated with that. So now I went over with you a couple of slides ago what the typical responsibilities that we found in job descriptions. Now, these are very often, the ones that are following are very often implied, but we rarely see them in job descriptions. Promoting staff morale, providing support and motivation to optimize workforce performance, to encourage and elicit ideas, creativity, and innovation from the workforce, to recognize, nurture, and retain talent, mentoring, to demonstrate supervisory activity that results in optimal health outcomes of persons served. And last but not least, attending to workforce wellness. If our workforce is not well, we can hardly expect them to perform in a way that will maximize the health and well-being of the people we serve. So let's expand sort of supervision now, and let's look at it through an expanded lens. So to begin with, to expand our view of supervision, supervisors need to recognize and appreciate the undermining and depleting power of occupational hazards. We're coming back to that now for a second time. Again, the continuous exposure to pain and suffering, the potential triggering of the worker's own pain and suffering, again, personalization and blurring of boundaries, compassion fatigue, and burnout. So through this expanded lens, these have to be recognized, along with recognizing that it's the role of a supervisor to build resilience, to identify and provide guidance commensurate with the level of resilience. This is a one size does not fit all. People come to their jobs with different levels of resilience, different capacities, and a supervisor needs to gauge where a person is and to provide them with what they need. It's a very, very customized effort. The next one is adopting a supervisory approach that is strengths-based and person-centered. Does that sound familiar? Sure, we do these and we promote these in terms of direct service, but they apply equally to providing supervision. Supervision should focus on the strengths of the supervisee, what they bring to the job that's considered a strength, and then finding out, as I mentioned earlier, what motivates them, what keeps them interested, what jazzes them up, and to incorporate that into the supervisory process. We need to view supervision through a parallel process lens, and that, simply said, is that the way we work with supervisors very often is what we expect from them in terms of how they work with the people we serve. We have to know when to be more collegial and consultative than evaluative. With a more sophisticated and experienced supervisee, the role has to change slightly. And so a supervisor is constantly sort of switching gears, changing hats, depending on what they perceive as the real needs and the strengths of the people that they're supervising. We need to identify and address signs of compassion fatigue, which we'll get to later on. And again, last but not least, we need to actively promote and support staff wellness. And this is a theme that is very prevalent in a trauma-informed culture and is something that is very important for organizational health. The wellness of the workforce is very often reflective of the wellness of the organization. Okay, this brings us to Chapter 2, applying the principles of trauma-informed care to the practice of supervision. So let's start with the sort of a broad overview of what supervision through a trauma-informed lens might look like. Let's take a look. So the trauma-informed principles, SAMHSA's principles, are safety, trustworthiness, and transparency, peer support, empowerment, voice and choice, collaboration and mutuality, cultural, historical, and gender issues. These are all pertinent in terms of how we work with supervisors and how supervisors themselves work with the workforce. So we want to ensure physical and emotional safety. We want to have supervisors ensure that their supervision is occurring in a place that feels safe. And that, of course, involves maintaining boundaries. The supervisory relationship needs to be transparent and trustworthy. That means it's one that will maximize trust through consistency and predictability, making tasks clear, maintaining appropriate boundaries, being respectful and non-judgmental. Promoting team spirit and mutuality in the workforce. A peer support component where peers can sort of rely on each other for support is very important. Empowerment, voice, and choice. Offering choice and control whenever possible, and promoting decision-making and skill strength building for managing challenges. A supervisor helps a supervisee build those skills and strengths so that they can manage challenges on the job. Collaboration and mutuality. Sharing of power is an important aspect of a trauma-informed supervisory experience. It's where the supervisor actually is not an authority, is not somebody who is purely directive, but opens the door for collaboration and for the supervisee's own capacity to make decisions. And then there are the cultural, historical, and gender issues where, as an organization, we need to provide training in these important areas. So the elements of trauma-informed supervision are trifold. Again, there's the safety aspect, there's the components of the relationship, the supervisory relationship, and there's the aspect of assisting and promoting management for the employee, for the workforce, in terms of their reactions to the stressful jobs that they have and the stressful events and situations that they are exposed to. So let's begin by looking at elements of a trauma-informed supervisory environment. So when it comes to safety, these are sort of, for some of you listening, some of these may be very evident, but they're worthwhile reviewing. Supervisory meetings need to take place in a space that is private and ensures confidentiality. Now, I've been in places where supervision is carried on the fly. And while that may be good, in some instances, it really needs to happen in a way, in a space that's comfortable, free of distraction, where the scheduling is consistent, the expectations are clear and predictable, limits of confidentiality are communicated clearly, and that really is the same thing that we do with our clients, where there is a limit to confidentiality if in the instance of supervisors where the supervisor reveals something that the supervisee reveals something that the supervisor feels may be the detriment of the people served or the organization itself. The format and content of the supervision needs to be arrived at collaboratively. Of course, again, from an environmental perspective, the organization is genuinely interested and active in supporting employee wellness. And last but not least here, hope is embedded in the organizational culture. Hope plays a tremendous role, we know, in deriving the optimal health outcomes of the people we serve, but they also, hope is also critical in obtaining the best performance from our workforce. So safety is key. So now we get to that relationship and what are the elements of a trauma-informed relationship. And I'm going to get into this more deeply, but just as a list, a laundry list, self-disclosure is welcome. The environment needs to be safe enough so that the supervisee can self-disclose when it's important and necessary with regard to their work. The content of the discussions is unrestricted. The person should feel that they can talk about pretty much anything. The supervisee is encouraged to lead when that's appropriate, and when the supervisee has something to say, it should be a bilateral leadership of that supervisory session. Supervisees are encouraged to be creative and innovative in solving problems. Trauma-informed supervisory relationships allows the supervisee to come up with their own strategies. The supervisor is emotionally present, observes, listens carefully, explores, and does not judge. Because that can shut down that free flow of information. Supervisor routinely asks for feedback. Is this working for you? And that feedback is important to make adjustments in the supervisory relationship that best meet the needs of the supervisee. The supervisor's approach is strengths-based. The supervisor recognizes and responds to supervisee distress and is accessible and available in the event of crisis, of course, that is something very critical and foundational in having that relationship be one of trust and trustworthiness. The supervisor is intentionally focused on building supervisee resilience. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. The supervisor supports and encourages supervisee wellness, and the supervisor provides wellness information and resources as needed. And that last bullet is really about having the supervisor have access to wellness information and resources so that they can provide them to the supervisee when the time is right. So let's talk a little bit about disclosure and self-disclosure in the supervisory encounter. I want to say here that disclosure can be a slippery slope depending on how it's handled. It must not be confounded with psychotherapy. The supervisor's role in response to disclosure is to acknowledge, support, and explore whether and how the self-disclosure might interfere with the supervisee's ability to do their job. So we want an open discourse. We want a supervisee who feels that they are able to talk about their own distress related to work or not, but their own distress, and have a supervisor be responsive, but in a way that acknowledges and supports the feelings and resiliency, not necessarily one where the supervisor immediately gives directions and unsolicited advice. It's not about giving advice. The supervisor must never assume that they know what's best, but rather to elicit what the supervisee thinks is best in terms of managing the stress associated with their disclosure. To encourage the supervisee to identify their own strengths, needs, and resources, and to offer connection to external resources that might be helpful. That is typically in the environments, behavioral health environments, are EAPs. So to the extent that those are available, but also to other community-based resources that might be helpful to the individual supervisee in managing the stress and distress associated with work that they disclose in the supervisory session. Now, here is a list of questions that you might ask, and these are not necessarily word for word what you can do, but this is a sort of the gist of how to respond to an employee who reports work-related stress or distress and discloses this in the supervisory session. So you could say things like, that must have been stressful or difficult or painful. How did you or are you coping with that? Have you shared this with anyone? What have you done in the past, or what are you going to do to get by, to manage this? What have you done or are you going to do, again, to manage, and who do you talk to when you feel worried or stressed like this? How is this or has this been affecting you? What can I do to make sure you are getting what you need? What can I do to support you in taking care of yourself? I appreciate all the hard work and dedication that you are putting into this, and I'm sure the client family does as well. Are you taking time for yourself to recharge? Do you have any vacations planned? So this is really a way or just the sort of the tone of how to respond and how to make the person feel that you are there in an authentic way, and that you're interested in helping them figure it out in order for you, the supervisee, to return to a way of working where the stresses are relieved. Now, we get now to kind of how to build that trauma-informed and resiliency-based supervisory relationship. I want to say that just before I get into that, it just occurs to me that what you want to convey in those post-disclosure questions, and I'm going to get back to them because I don't want to leave this out, what you want to convey in terms of these kinds of questions is that the experience does not define the supervisee, that this is accept that this is part of the work, and that it does not define them, but rather it's a sharing, and you're there to listen and to help in whatever way you can. You want to convey that the individual is not alone, and certainly that they are not to blame, that the work itself is difficult, is stressful, and their reaction to it is not abnormal. Supervisors often ask for tools that they can use. And I think that when we talk about the supervisory relationship, it's important to recognize that as a supervisor, you are the tool. You have the skills and position to intervene on multiple levels and to have an impact on your organization and on the people you supervise. So this is how you kind of operationalize the tool that the tools that you have or that you are in terms of achieving the best possible outcomes for the work experience of the supervisee and ultimately for the health outcomes of the people the supervisee works with. Okay, so getting back to building a trauma-informed and resiliency-based supervisory relationship. So here are a couple of pointers. You know, to the extent possible, observe the supervisee's day-to-day work activities so that when you are providing your supervisory expertise, you're referring to real-life performance examples in the supervision. Learn and understand what supervisees personally value, are challenged by, and are rewarded by in their work. Your role here is to help the supervisee find meaning. And this gets back to what it is that draws people to the field. So that's a very individual thing, but it's important for the supervisor to know that for each person they supervise. Be open to sharing of feelings and reactions to challenging situations. This is the self-disclosure piece. And invite the person, the supervisee, to come up with their own strategies for coping with those situations. Encourage supervisees to develop self-care plans. We'll get into that also a little bit later. And check in from time to time as to how it's working. And this is really where the supervisor plays an active role in their supervisee's wellness, which has those implications for over the effectiveness of service delivery in general. So, in helping the supervisee manage reactions to stress, the supervisor can assist the supervisee in identifying emotional triggers that interferes with the supervisee's job performance. So this is over time to be able to reflect back to the supervisee the things that seem to trigger their own stress and distress. The supervisor recognizes the supervisee's strengths as the basis for guiding and arriving at solutions to work-related problems. So this, again, over time to assess what the supervisee can bring on their own in coming up with strategies to manage their own stress. And the supervisor supports the supervisee's development of strategies for managing work-related stress. And this is really a process of elicitation, working with the supervisee to get them to come up with what works for them. And finally, the supervisor uses mindfulness strategies to strengthen the supervisee's handling of occupational hazards. Now, mindfulness, I don't know, I'm not going to get into the details of mindfulness, but you can certainly do that on your own. But mindfulness strategies are an important way for anyone to be more effective in the jobs and the responsibilities they have, and particularly in the difficult work in the behavioral health field. There's a set of important tools and strategies that everyone should adopt really in order to be more effective. So getting to now to what I told you we'd be getting to more in depth, the resilience, compassion, fatigue, and self-care. So resilience is a function of an individual's temperament, personality, competence, and the grit, the perseverance that a person has sort of inherently, a person's intelligence, a person's commitment to learning, a person's future orientation, a person's self-efficacy and self-esteem. So this is what people kind of bring as part of their own makeup that assists them in being resilient to stress and distress in the workforce. Now, this varies from individual to individual, but these are the elements, the inherent elements in individuals and people that, and this is for everyone, that helps them manage the stresses and distresses of life in general. Now, as far as building resilience and the supervisor's role in helping supervisees build resilience, a strength-based approach to supervision is essential. Having that trustworthy and reliable supervisory relationship, again, the elements of having a place where the individual supervisee feels they can trust and where they feel safe. The cultivation of a trustworthy peer network. This is kind of a, how shall I put this? This is a cultural thing that you can feel immediately. I know in my work, when I walk into organizations, you can immediately get a sense of the collegiality of the workforce. And where there's workforce tension, that trustworthiness usually is not there. Supervisors need to cultivate trustworthiness among their own staff and to create an environment where peers can relate to each other in supportive and helpful ways, in helping manage helping each other manage their reactions to stressful work. Supervision needs to incorporate collaboration and empowerment. Again, leveling that power dynamic, supervisees who feel that they're being judged and evaluated all the time is not going to result in a supervisory relationship that's open and collaborative. The organization needs to have a genuine belief in learning, and by that I mean that people can learn and people can change, and people can benefit from supervision, and especially from trauma-informed and resiliency-based supervision. And finally, but again, last but not least, and certainly we could put this one at the top of the list, is hope. An organization that is hopeful about the progress and the way in which people can grow is very important, and I can't really stress that too much. So as a supervisor, sort of incorporating all of this, you can teach supervisees to identify and address emotional and cognitive depletion, the kind of the result of a stressful work environment and the result of those occupational hazards. You can strengthen a person's resilience, their ability to more effectively manage the impact of highly stressful work conditions and situations. You can create a supervisory environment that builds resilience and the kind of impact that can even supersede individual factors. Those individual factors of temperament and all of that, well, those are important, but you can build resilience that supersedes those, that you can provide people, supervisees, with a supervisory experience that helps them to grow and build resilience beyond those individual factors. And you can provide support and guidance regarding the management of work-related stressors. But again, acknowledgement that those stressors exist and opening the door for the individual to be able to share those stressors in a way that allows them to get the maximum benefit of your role of supporting and guiding, acknowledging, reinforcing, and so on. So there's an expression that really bears great relevance to the work of our direct care staff, is that they provide help, but very often that's helping that hurts. And helping that hurts opens kind of, it really is the basis for this whole presentation. It's how do we help people who are helping others where that helping can hurt them. And this is also referred to as secondary traumatic stress, STS, or compassion fatigue, or also referred to in parlance as vicarious trauma. So when a supervisee is exposed to the firsthand traumatic life events of the people they serve, that stress can over time result in secondary traumatic stress. Very often supervisees can find themselves re-experiencing personal trauma or experience an increase in arousal or avoidance reactions. And arousal, we'll get into a definition of that a little bit later, but just for now, it's whatever it is that happens to the individual psychologically and physically in response to that exposure to the stress and distress of others. It can lead also to avoidance reactions, which can be just as serious. This arousal can affect memory. They can affect the perceptions of one's self-confidence and sense of safety, one's sense of trust and independence. This can be a very serious result in terms of the person's ability to do their job. In a state of acute distress and arousal, the supervisee's capacity for processing information and learning is highly diminished. And there's a reason for that, which we'll get into. But for now, let's just consider when a person is in that state of arousal and distress, they're very unlikely to be able to benefit from instructions or directions because the brain in that state cannot process instructions. The person can't learn in that state. There's a whole other phenomenon going on, and we'll get to that shortly. As a supervisor, your effectiveness in helping depends on your knowing your supervisee's level of distress and arousal, and there are signs that are very visible that are clues to the existence of secondary traumatic stress. And this is what they are. It's a result of the empathic. This is sort of the irony of this, is that it's the empathy of the individual, which is a strength, that ultimately results in this phenomenon, because the empathy is an experience where the supervisee, the worker, is over sort of personalizing or over identifying with the challenges and the distress that the person they're serving is bringing to that relationship. And people with mental illness, addiction, and trauma, and the relentless exposure to that information and those experiences is the basis for secondary traumatic stress. And the symptoms include irritability, apathy, loss of motivation, fatigue, feeling overwhelmed, loss of interest in things you enjoy, and intrusive thoughts about the details that are shared with the worker by the people that they serve. So these are the kinds of things that the supervisor can detect that would lead them to believe that the supervisee is undergoing this kind of secondary traumatic stress. STS interferes with positive job performance, of course, and by extension, optimal health outcomes for the people that are served, because the supervisee, the worker, is incapable of really then being present and attending to the needs and of the people that they're working with. And if these are not addressed, they can have serious health consequences for supervisees. So all of these symptoms over time and without any kind of intervention very often have sort of the kinds of outcomes that we all don't want to get to. So from the perspective of supervision, being able to identify these and being able to intervene in a proper supervisory role is key to preventing what usually happens is that the person is either terminated or they will leave because they can no longer perform their job. So how can we prevent and minimize compassion fatigue? Recognize and appreciate the occupational hazards that lead to it and to the employee turnover that results from it. Train supervisors to conduct behavioral health supervision through a trauma-informed and resiliency-based lens. So this is a training program in organizations that can lead supervisors to be able to incorporate those trauma-informed and resiliency-based principles into their work. Cultivate an organizational culture that genuinely believes in and actively supports and invests in employee self-care and wellness. And again, hope being the compass for accomplishing all this. So self-care, well, that's a tough one because it involves adopting lifestyles that enhance wellness and reduce the impact of emotional and physical stressors. And there's a lot to say about this. We can do an entire webinar on just this aspect. But exercise, healthy diet, adequate sleep, abstaining from substance use, pursuing creative outlets, and practicing mindfulness, yoga, meditation, relaxation are all important elements in self-care. It's more possible when it's supported by an actively promoted in supervision by the workplace culture. So a culture that has the kind of components that provides resources and policies that support self-care, and that these policies are well promoted makes a big difference in how the workforce will operate in general. So in summary, the research tells us that trauma-informed supervision promotes staff retention and reduces turnover, reduces levels of vicarious trauma, influences supervisee ability to more effectively cope with their work, enhances worker well-being by strengthening ties to the organization and increasing affiliation with the larger field, and facilitates and supports effective dissemination of sustainability of best practices. So this isn't just sort of pie in the sky. There are studies that have shown that these are the results of adopting these principles into supervision. Trauma and resilience-informed supervision increases safety for all, improves the social environment that improves relationships for all, cares for caregivers, increases the quality of services, reduces negative encounters and events, creates a community of health, and increases success at work. And when you get this, you'll be able to refer to the sources for this presentation, and particularly the positive outcomes. And I open it now for question and discussion.
All right. Thank you so much, Eve. So that was a lot of information and not a lot of time, and we appreciate you getting through it. So we do have a few questions that have already come through, so I'm going to go ahead and just get started on those in the interest of time. So the first question is about, this one actually came up during the slides about responding to supervisee disclosure, the do's and don'ts slide. The question is, what are some ways that we can avoid judging?
Well, you know, I think that how do we avoid judging in our regular everyday relationships? By listening, by not giving unsolicited advice, by not assuming that we know what's best, and by simply allowing the person to talk freely and to listen intently and to let the person know that you're not there for any other reason but to help them resolve what they're experiencing, the distress that they're experiencing.
Okay, thank you. The next question is around any literature that you could recommend to supervisors to help build up their supervisory skills when it comes to this topic in particular.
Yeah, I could tell you that I wouldn't recommend any particular thing, but I think that if you go online and you put in the keywords trauma-informed and supervision, you're going to come up with a lot of things. It's not something that we just invented this afternoon. People out there are talking about this, and there is information out there. It's not one sort of book where you'll find everything, but it's looking at a lot of different places. I think I believe there's also something on the SAMHSA website about it.
Okay. All right. If a supervisee becomes emotionally overwhelmed, how can a supervisor not be a quote-unquote therapist and ask if this affects you personally or if this is simply overwhelming to you?
Well, overwhelming and affecting you personally, I think, is synonymous. If a person tells you, I think that the first thing to do is to ask the kind of open-ended questions. You know, one of the things as I was putting this together, and what other people that I've discussed this with, you know, is they say that motivational interviewing is very often a good way to kind of think about how to do supervision, because there are a lot of key points there. So, you know, reflecting back to the person, simply telling them that you understand that this is stressful for them, that this is difficult for them, and letting them, trying to elicit from them how they think this is impacting their ability to do the work. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, okay, tell me how you know that you're overwhelmed, and tell me how you think this has an effect on how you do your job, or an effect on how you can't do your job. But it's really keeping the dialogue very open and eliciting the person's own experience of what they're feeling and experiencing.
Okay, thank you, Eve. So we do have about 4 more questions that just popped in. The next one is about creating a culture of hope. So what can a supervisor do to help create a culture of hope when the organization seems to create a culture of despair? And actually, there's another question that sort of piggybacks on that, so I'm going to just read them to you both at the same time. The next one is, how do you handle employee morale? Sorry about that. When they are aware that the supervisor is not supported by the chain of command?
Okay, we're getting into systems now, and I have to tell you that there's no short answer for that. But what these 2 questions are implying is a dysfunctional organizational culture. And if you've got a supervisor who doesn't have a trustworthy relationship with their own supervisor or with the organization, it's going to be very hard for that supervisor to show those or to be trustworthy or to function in a way that's positive for their supervisees. What happens in those situations is that the supervisor experiences their own distress because they know ultimately that the organization they work for is not going to support them. And certainly, it's probably an organization that's not trauma-informed or resiliency-based. So that's a really big problem and something that has to be addressed at an organizational level. I think it really takes it out of the hands of the supervisor. I think in those instances, the supervisor can only do their best to maintain their own integrity as much as possible and to operate in a way that they feel is moral and is correct. But ultimately, I suspect that the supervisor in that kind of organizational environment is going to experience their own secondary traumatic stress.
Okay. The next question is actually about approaching disciplinary action from a trauma-informed perspective. So my suggestion for the person that typed this question in would be to join our October webinar on October 15th from noon to 1 p.m. because we're going to talk about difficult conversations and supervision on that one. So Eva, I'm just going to skip over that one for now because we have a few others that we may be able to get to a couple more. What advice could you give someone who's getting into a supervisory position, especially since this is a new leadership role for that person? So what advice would you give to new supervisors out there?
Okay, well, the first thing is I would check in with my own kind of my own ways of dealing with my stress and distress. So to make sure that I have the coping skills myself, and that I have someone that I can rely on when I have a sort of a crisis, if you will. The second thing is, so it's sort of checking in and checking yourself first, your own sort of trauma and how you've dealt with it. I don't think that anybody in this world is kind of spared trauma. So we all come with it on some, on that continuum, I guess. But that we check in ourselves and that we make sure that we have dealt with our own, so that when we're working with someone in supervision and we hear theirs, we can sort of at least know that we're going to pull from our own experiences as appropriate to help the person we're supervising deal with theirs. The second thing is certainly as a new supervisor, not to feel that you have to have all the answers, not to feel that that's even possible, but rather to go into it and allow yourself also to learn from your supervisees, that, very often they can teach you things, and to be relaxed and to give yourself a chance to kind of be present, more important than be smart. I know that being a new supervisor, your first thing is you want to be smart. You want to be smarter. And the idea here is to kind of put that aside and really to be present is the most important thing. And to listen and to be able to convey to the person that you're supervising that they can trust you. I think that's the best advice I can give on new supervisors.
Good advice. And then the last one sort of piggybacks on that too, or at least on what you were saying in your response. Do you have any resources for direct care staff with significant histories of trauma that impact their interactions with the people receiving services? So any place you can sort of point us in the direction of?
I don't think I do, but I do think that it really helps to, as an organization, to begin to talk about trauma and what trauma-informed really means. And, today we talked about trauma-informed supervision, but really that supervision can only really thrive and have the best impact if it exists in a trauma-informed, in an organization that is truly a culture that is trauma-informed. So I think the best thing I can say is that an organization that is trauma and resiliency based is going to be the best setting for an employee who has their own trauma, because it will be part of, in other words, it will be acknowledged by the culture, and generally if the culture acknowledges it, it means that there'll be supports for that individual within the organization.
Right, right. All right, great. Thank you so much, Eve Addis. I appreciate you joining us today and presenting on this topic. Next month, October 15th, we'll have NIAPRIS's very own Ruth Cologne Wagner joining us to talk about difficult conversations. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today, and have a good rest of your day.
It was my pleasure. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.